Welcome back, and thank you for joining me again on my weekly update with the worms. I am excited to say I finally put the mosquito screen in. So the worms for the past week have been under the mosquito screen instead of being under just the bubble wrap or no lid. By doing that, the castings that were just under the mosquito screen dried out a lot. They're still more damp than what I find in the Vermibag totes, but in comparison to where they were, they are exceptionally drier, and I'm very pleased to see that the mosquito screen worked a lot better. On the side with the worms, that's where I put the food, and that's where the bubble wrap was. So I found tons of worm balls in there, and they are definitely migrating back and forth between both sides. The castings on this side are definitely wetter than the other side, so I am mixing the two sides together to blend them up to make sure that there aren't really dry castings on one side, really wet on the other, or that there's a situation where every week the castings just gain more and more moisture. Being that this one is going to be heading towards a harvesting period probably in 3 weeks, I'm just going to give it a regular feeding, and I'm not going to add any additional cardboard material to this. I'm still trying to figure out levels in terms of how much castings is too much, but for this one I was satisfied with the levels, satisfied with the castings. So it was just a regular feeding, putting the bubble wrap on, and then prepping it for the next week. Over on the second regular tote, just as a reminder, none of my totes have holes in the bottom, holes in the top. There was just a hole in the lid, but due to the humidity in the house and just here in New Jersey in general, I left the lid off. So that's an example of what the castings looks like on the drier side, the side that just had the mosquito netting. And even though it's much drier than where it came from, in this bin, it's definitely damper than the sister bin of it. And also, on this bubble wrap, there were a ton of cocoons. I wasn't able to really zoom in and capture them, but the top of that, or really the bottom of that, was covered in cocoons. So the worms in this bin are definitely active and reproducing, which makes me happy. So I know that they are very much enjoying their environment. And there was a large worm ball there. And again, you tend to get larger worm balls when you do pocket feeding versus just feeding the worms over the whole top of the bin. Again, in about a month, these are going to be taken to the harvest period. So I am not going to add any additional cardboard, just giving it a regular feeding. And as the weeks go, as it gets closer to harvest, I'm going to make the feeding smaller and smaller to encourage them to break down the cardboard in the bin. But overall, the health of both of these bins are looking great. So it's just a regular feeding, the bubble wrap, and the mosquito screen, and they are set up for another week. Over with the first of the two Vermibag totes. With this one, I tend to prefer the castings in these. There was only a couple worms on the bubble wrap in this one, and the castings are definitely there's moisture all over the top of this one, but the castings themselves do not have a large amount of water that they're holding. But as they are getting to the point of harvest, they are going to hold more moisture. So it's very important that I pay attention to how wet the castings are so that I don't end up with any silt. But this is a humongous entanglement of worms. I can't even say that that's a worm ball. It's just a large mass of worms around whatever was remaining in the food. So these guys are definitely still enjoying their environment, munching down on the remnants of whatever's remaining in the bin. And I would say this one is probably about a week or two from when I will begin to harvest. And I use bait trays. I do not do the migration. Looks like the migration works, but I have no success with the migration at all. So this one is set up for the week. No special feedings or anything done to it. Just something to mention, you should always check your gloves for juvenile worms whenever you see a lot of cocoons, because you can mix up your worms if you separate them. Moving over to the second Vermi bag tote. Now this is the one that I added the cardboard to get the level of the castings up, and the worms are covering the bubble wrap. I believe it does have to do with the cardboard holding a lot of moisture. I don't see where they are hanging out on the sides of the actual tote. So I'm going to keep an eye on that and just see how they're acting. But this was the only bin where they were covering the bubble wrap, but it's also the only bin that I've added cardboard to recently. And mixing up the castings in here, the castings themselves were dry, but the cardboard was damp. And I thought this was a worm ball, and it turned out just to be cardboard kind of stuck together with some food. So again, as far as moisture with this one, I'm going to give it more food because I'm not taking this one to harvest in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to give it some more food, add some moisture in, trying to avoid adding water simply because it's becoming hotter and I don't want it to hold too much moisture because of the humidity. So it's a fine balance with that I'm dealing with. So that's what I'm going to do for this week. Regular feeding, bubble wrap, and then close this one up, and it's ready for another week. My last bin and only flow through system is my Vermi Bag Mini. I do intend to harvest this when I harvest the other Vermi bag tote, just so that I'm not harvesting one bin at a time. And this one, I was dealing with an issue where the edges were very dry, which can tend to happen because all of the castings that come in contact with the sides, or all of the material that comes in the sides, are exposed to air due to the fabric. And because the edges were a bit dry, I gave this a big feeding of a type of food that's going to release moisture into the bag. Again, I didn't spray this one down because I did not want to introduce moisture just yet, knowing it's going to be more humid in the house. But I did do a second dose of the worm grip because the neem cake in there is a natural deterrent for the beetles, and I noticed that I was getting a larger population of beetles than I've seen in a while. Otherwise, that bin was set up, and that concludes this episode for the week. Thank you for hanging to the end. If you'd like to see a video from when I last harvested the Vermi Bag Mini, just click the link right here. As always, please like and subscribe. Again, thanks for watching.